Please take your seats. Our program will begin in 10 minutes. Thank you. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Our program will begin. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Our program will begin. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Our program will begin. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Our program will begin. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Our program will begin. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Welcome to CleanMed 2024. Please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Please welcome to the stage, Healthcare Without Harm and Practice Green Health founder, Gary Cohen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the first time we've done Clean Med in Salt Lake City. And it's an amazing place. You know, it's home to 2.5 million people, but 10 million birds. This Great Salt Lake is one of the great migration places for over 350 species of birds. This is also going to be the home to the Olympics. In the next couple of days or weeks, we're going to learn that Salt Lake City got the award for the 2034 Summer Olympics. I hope that you enjoy your time here. I want to start the conference with gratitude. I want to start with certainly acknowledging the Healthcare Without Harm and Practice Green Health staff and support staff for making this conference possible. Anyone who's tried to organize a wedding or a party for 800 people knows what a major undertaking that is. It's an incredibly complex task that takes extraordinary effort, and these people have done an amazing job to ensure that every aspect of this conference has got a framework around sustainability, and that we hope that you'll enjoy your Clean Med experience. Beginning with the site selection down to the smallest details like signage, we've considered sustainability at every stage. Can the staff from Healthcare Without Harm and Practice Green Health and Meet Green, our helpers in doing this, please stand and let's acknowledge them all. I also want to acknowledge our sponsors who are instrumental in making Clean Med a success. Please join me in thanking our host sponsor, Philips, our champion sponsors, Cardinal Health, CREF, and Schneider Electric, our leadership sponsor, Blue Shield of California and Jacobs, and our partnering sponsors, BD, Johnson & Johnson, and the Joint Commission, if you can believe that. Who would have thunk it? And a big thank you to all of our experienced and in-kind sponsors. We are meeting on the land of the Ute tribe, and the Shoshone, and the Paiute, and the Goshet. And of course, you know the state is named after the Ute tribe. We have a lot to learn from Native peoples and their commitment to their ancestors, their land, and their future generations. If we made decisions on the well-being of 7 generations, as many Native peoples do in their thinking, we would not be facing the polycrisis of biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change. It's also important to note that Native people are also on the front lines of the climate crisis all over the world, defending ancestral lands around mining, fracking, pipelines, and oil drilling that threatens not only their health, but the health of billions of people on the planet. I always like to start the conference by asking the question, how many people are here at Clean Med for the first time? Just raise your hands. Oh my goodness. That's a lot of people, It helps because it allows me to say jokes that I've said before, because you haven't heard them before. We hope that you find great value in this event, and especially hope that you find other people here that you can stay in touch with, people who you can learn from and those who can learn from you. I can't stress enough that this is not just an educational conference, it's an action event. It's a community of practice. The theme is in our name, Practice Green Health. The people who come here get stuff done. They do good work in their institutions, in their communities, and in the world. This is my 28th Clean Med conference. Yes, I'm that old. And I've seen it change a lot over the years. At the beginning in 2001, we had a smattering of people who were doing sustainability work in their hospitals, most of it unpaid. We had a couple of clinicians. Climate wasn't even on the agenda. We didn't know what the Joint Commission did, for sure. We had no one from the Veterans Administration. At the first Clean Med, we had about 100 people. When we met in CleanMed in Vienna a couple of years later, we had one of the exhibitors had mugs of beer on tap from 8 in the morning. At CleanMed in Oxford, England, they served those ridiculous triangle sandwiches with the crust cut off. The first time we met in Pittsburgh years ago, the hotel impressed us with free-range coffee and locally grown bananas in Pittsburgh. So we've come a long way from those early days. This year, there are over 800 people in attendance. We have over 100 clinicians advancing sustainability and climate-smart interventions at the clinical level. We have momentum. We also have good food. I recently saw a video of Northwell Hospital in New York. An older woman was lying in bed, in her hospital bed, and the chef came in and said, well, how did she feel about her time in the hospital? And she said, your pot roast, as good as the Plaza Hotel. The French toast, as good as the Plaza. And the cheesecake, oh my God. This is the best hospital I've ever been in my life. And when they asked her if she needed anything else, she said she wanted to make a reservation for dinner on Saturday night back at the hospital. I've actually heard the same thing at the University of Vermont Medical Center. People say, well, what are you doing for dinner tonight? Well, let's go down to the hospital. They have a great Asian stir-fried. Things have changed a lot since we started this. We're finally recognizing that food is medicine. If we can feed people healthy and delicious food in our facilities, if we can support sustainable farming in the communities that we serve as economic anchors, lower our carbon footprint, we can provide food to people at risk and who are food insecure, we can reduce the epidemic of diabetes and heart disease and stroke in our society. There are now over 130 hospitals nationwide that have committed to the Cool Food Pledge, which means they're committed to reducing their climate emissions from food by 25% by 2030. To honor this sea change in our sector's relationship to food, over the last several years, we've had culinary contests at CleanMed of the best hospital chefs in the country. As part of our commitment to sustainability, the top winning chef will serve a delicious plant-based meal to you at our gala this Thursday night. I also want to welcome the 80 representatives from 30 hospitals from our sister network called America's Essential Hospitals. These are the hospitals that care for our largest share of Medicaid and Medicare patients. They're often hospitals in our cities where residents go when they have no money and they're in an emergency. These are the health systems that don't have huge endowments. They may not have dedicated sustainability staff or climate experts, but they have incredibly dedicated staff to take care of the community, especially in times of crisis. We hope your time here is fruitful and you take away some strategies that achieve both sustainability and cost-saving outcomes. Healthcare Without Harm and America's Essential Hospitals are now collaborating to support a cohort of hospitals to gain access to the Inflation Reduction Act funds to build climate resilience infrastructure for their facilities and in their communities. We recognize that many people working here on sustainability and climate are often alone in their institutions. You don't have large staffs. Sometimes you're a staff of one. So this conference is a chance to meet others who are playing a similar role in their hospitals. There are people here who have shown how their hospital systems, that climate smart is not something extra. It's not a nice-to-do thing. Climate smart healthcare is contributing to patient health, community health, and planetary health. It's the next iteration of quality healthcare delivery. For a long time, we thought that the climate crisis was something distant in time and space. It was a problem that future generations would need to deal with. It would impact other people somewhere else. The fossil fuel companies helped fuel these perceptions by denying climate change, by manufacturing doubt, by intentionally confusing the public and covering up the science. We've lost more than 30 years in this deception, a time when we could have started the great transformation to a clean energy economy. Last year, as many of you know, was the hottest year on record. In the summer, there were a few weeks when 125 million Americans were under an extreme heat advisory. All across the country now, we are seeing what climate change looks like. It looks like dengue fever that's now in Florida and Texas. Looks like flooding in Miami on sunny days. Looks like massive rainstorms and wildfires in California. Looks like extreme heat that killed over 1,000 people in the Northwest a couple of summers ago. Looks like Houston last week, when severe storms left 500,000 people without clean water. The climate crisis has come home to us, and we can no longer turn away. We in healthcare have a special role in society. We live by the Hippocratic Oath to first do no harm. A few years ago, we learned that our sector is responsible for almost 9% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions and 25% of all global healthcare emissions. That translates into the annual emissions of over 125 coal-fired power plants. So what does the Hippocratic Oath mean in a world where we're contributing to the very diseases and environmental crises that show up at the front door of our hospitals and clinics? The answer is in our other name, healthcare without harm. We represent 20% of the U.S. economy. We have this unique opportunity to lead the rest of society to kick our addiction to fossil fuels and toxic chemicals by transforming our energy, our buildings, our lighting, the food we buy and serve, the anesthetic gases we use for surgery, the medical equipment we deploy, the plastics that we overuse, even the pathways of care. We have the opportunity to embed that ethical mandate to do no harm into the supply chain that serves our facilities, our communities, and our patients. In service of this goal, this year our Healthcare Climate Council launched a climate excellence standard for suppliers. It recognizes suppliers to healthcare that are joining with their hospital partners in reducing their climate footprint in accordance with science-based targets, because we know that more than 3/4 of the hospital's greenhouse gas emissions and climate footprint is in the supply chain and in the investments. You will find many sessions at this conference devoted to this transformation from healthcare leaders and companies that are already implementing these innovations. In addition to mitigating our environmental and climate footprint, we also have an opportunity responsible to anchor the resilience of the communities we serve. We learned during the COVID pandemic that we sit at the epicenter of collective trauma. We need to be the last building standing in a climate emergency. We need to understand what climate change means for our communities. Who are the most vulnerable people to its impacts? How is the climate crisis impacting all the mental health issues facing our community? And how is the climate crisis exacerbating all the racial, economic, and health inequities that we already face? We can no longer afford to have health equity work happening on one part of our hospital systems and the climate and sustainability work happening in someplace else. You will find many sessions at CleanMed this year, including the fabulous pre-conference we just did, focused on integrative solutions that address climate mitigation, climate resilience, and health equity together. We need to build this integrated vision together and make it the new norm for healthcare delivery. This is the foundation of Healthcare Without Harm's strategic plan: mitigation, resilience, and equity. And that is the guiding strategies for our journey over the next several years. And the core ingredient in the strategic plan is in this room. It's all of you. You are the pioneers for healthcare in the age of climate crisis. You are the first generation of healthcare leaders that are operating at 3 levels: individual healing, community healing, and planetary healing. Every generation after ours will need to operate along these 3 dimensions. Together, we're setting down tracks and strategies that point the way to a much broader vision of healing, a much more expansive role than treating sick people. The other special role we hold in our society is as truth tellers. During COVID, we were called upon to play a critical role as credible messengers to the public about the severity of the pandemic, about the importance of testing and vaccination. We had to overcome disinformation, conspiracy theories, and politicians politicizing the crisis. Yet in large part, healthcare professionals emerged as beacons of truth. We have the opportunity to leverage this trust to become beacons for climate action and policy change, to educate our communities and politicians that the climate crisis is a health crisis, that our reliance on fossil fuels is not only the major driver for pollution of the atmosphere, but also for the pollution of our bodies and the pollution of our democracy. As we move away from our reliance on fossil fuels, we will improve the health of billions of people on this planet. Our message is incredibly positive and connects to values that people care most about, which is their health and the health of their families and communities. Finally, I want to speak about personal resilience and well-being. The work that we are doing is not a 100-yard dash. It is a marathon. It's a relay race. As I mentioned earlier, we sit at the center of society's traumas, health traumas, racial traumas, economic trauma, climate trauma. It's a lot to hold. And we can't do it if we are depleted ourselves, if we are burnt out. We want to create a culture of well-being in our organization and in your organizations, and share a few opportunities that we've created here to support you during your time. We have a relaxation room where you can go, where you need some quiet time without people going on about their phones and on the phone, so it's technology-free. We've organized a fun run for those who enjoy running as a way to care for their bodies. And we have a session on Wednesday morning called Ground and Move, where participants can learn simple breathing exercises and yoga exercises that you can take back home and do in your home or at your workplace. I attended a week-long meditation retreat last year in British Columbia, organized by Christiana Figueres, the woman who was the key negotiator for the Paris Climate Treaty. She's been organizing retreats for climate advocates because she believes that people need some kind of contemplative practice to maintain their spirit and health to continue to do this kind of work. She was especially seeing a lot of anxiety and despair in young climate activists. When I was at the retreat, I met a woman whose entire work was focused on the issue of mental health and climate, and I thought that our community needed to hear about her work. Her name is Britt Wray, and she's the director of Circle at Stanford Psychiatry, a research and action initiative focused on community-based solutions for resilience, climate leadership, and emotional well-being. Britt is the author of 2 books, including her latest, Generation Dread, Finding Purpose in an Age of Climate Anxiety, which is an impassioned perspective on how to stay sane amid climate disruption. Please join me in welcoming Britt Wray to the stage.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hey, great. Can you hear me okay? Echo's not too bad? Okay, perfect. So I want to say this is a real treat and a deep, deep honor to be invited to kick off this critically important conference today with you all. Thank you so much to the organizers of Healthcare Without Harm and Clean Med, Practice Green Health, all of you behind this event, and Gary specifically for inviting me here today. Now, we have a lot of ground to cover today, and I want to invite us to come into a space of deeply exploring the role of our humanity as health professionals in the climate crisis. We're going to go on an interdisciplinary romp, which involves both outlining the problem of the climate and health crisis we face, but then also diving into how we feel as humans, not as professionals, as humans with each other, as we really look at this predicament, in order to then dive into the solutions, the opportunities, and the actions that we can operationalize, that you can take on as health systems to build up community resilience to climate harms, and also deepen your role as necessary heroes at this time. Okay, and to begin, what is it that causes the climate crisis? The technological explanation that we're often given is, of course, that our activities as humans are emitting too many greenhouse gases, and that is totally true. But it doesn't explain how we ended up with this problem getting so bad. What are the values underpinning this that's enabling this life-threatening breakdown of our support systems in the ecosphere? The climate crisis at its root, it is based in the oppression and exploitation of people and nature. And it gets expressed in multiple ways, including when we treat nature as a resource to be exploited for human benefit without consideration of the long-term consequences to ecosystems and other living beings. And it gets expressed as the global south is continuously exploited for the benefit of the global north. And we see it when we notice that there have been entire zones, peoples, regions, cultures sacrificed, climate sacrifice zones for the benefit of dominating groups. And of course, we see it when the disregard for future generations is just so blatant for the preference of those of us who are living today. Now, I want to root us in this at the beginning, just to point out that when we're thinking holistically about bringing about effective solutions to this crisis, we need to root them in equity, in justice, in order to respond and not just produce Band-Aid solutions to this problem, because, folks, we cannot electric vehicle our way out of this thing. Now, we're dealing with a lot, not just climate change. There's war, racism, economic instability, all kinds of things. I'm just wondering, we're amongst friends. How many of you ever find yourself feeling a bit like this, so overwhelmed at the state of the world right now that you find yourself focusing on some menial task in front of you, like gardening, just to stay sane? It's a pretty good coping mechanism from time to time. Yeah, there's many of us. This is a no-shame kind of situation. Now, in the climate corner of this poly crisis, there's actually a taxonomy of climate emotions that have been studied in people around the world to show how we're feeling about this climate crisis, and the Climate Mental Health Network has produced this emotions wheel to display them. And you'll see that there's a wide valence of emotion, the comfortable ones and the uncomfortable ones put together. And I invite you, just find an emotion here, whether it's betrayal, outrage, depression, anxiety, gratitude, empowerment. What speaks to you today? What is your most salient climate emotion? And just yell it out. Panic. Positivity. Hope, despair. Outrage. What else? Anxiety. Betrayal. Inspiration. Frustration. Gratitude. Thank you. I think you've demonstrated extremely well that what we're talking about is an emotional biodiversity of feelings that are coming up at this time. And we should not fall victim to this false dichotomy that we see all around us, that we either feel hopeful or fearful about the climate crisis, and it stops with that. No, there's a plethora of human emotive responses to what is going on, and they all have insights to teach us, and we can feel proud to move and cycle through them and support each other with it when we pierce the damaging bubble of silence around the fact that this is having a psychological and emotional toll. Now, I tend to feel my most distressing climate emotions when I confront the deliberate climate warming that's been imposed upon us by fossil fuel companies and those who have been happy to be paid by them. So here I'm referring to the fact that science historians, they've shown us that many fossil fuel companies had internal climate modeling groups in the 70s and 80s, climate scientists on staff who confirmed the dangers of the greenhouse effect, and who even shared internal memos like this one from 1981 by Exxon, that it is distinctly possible that the corporate planning scenario will later produce effects which will indeed be catastrophic, at least for a substantial fraction of the Earth's population, right? So they knew very blatantly, and instead of changing their business plan, they shut down the climate science groups and engaged in many decades of campaigns to confuse the public about the urgent need for action by cherry-picking data, planting fake experts in the media, buying influence, paying politicians, and this has resulted in tragic global consequences, turning our world today literally into a global crime scene on climate that we now, as health systems, have to respond to. Now, why a crime scene? If things do not dramatically change with continued warming of the planet at this rate, by 2070, 19% of the planet is expected to be uninhabitable for 1 to 3 billion people, mass injustice, and climate disasters may lead to $12.5 trillion worth of economic losses and 2 billion healthy life years lost by mid-century. Now, there is ample evidence to show that the climate crisis has become the #1 threat to public health this century, and that our health is literally at the mercy of fossil fuels. So we see this in terms of environmental degradation, causing forced migration, leading to conflict, and the fact that climate change is affecting and enlarging the spread of vector-borne diseases like malaria, dengue, and Zika. And of course, in that it's harder to grow nutrient-rich foods also when the carbon concentration is higher in the atmosphere, leading to malnutrition. And of the 8.3 million deaths worldwide that are known to be caused by outdoor air pollution, we can see that our burning of fossil fuels contributes to over 5 million of these annual deaths per year. And the great opportunity here is that these deaths could therefore potentially be avoided by phasing out fossil fuels, which is what the World Health Organization is asking for, along with climate justice organizers worldwide. So, not to belabor the point, but even where we expand this infrastructure for oil and coal and gas, where there's activities of this machinery, we see that pregnant women living near these operations have a 40% increased risk of premature birth, which we know comes with all kinds of risk for mortality and long-term developmental problems in newborns. We see respiratory ailments, carcinogens that can lead to cancers in children and adults, cardiovascular diseases, all kinds of negative impacts on cognitive ability, increased rates of dementia in the elderly, and of course then the risk of death and early mortality. And yet, despite this crime scene and injustice, the climate crisis is not a pass-fail test by any means. There's never a moment by which we fall over a cliff and everything is lost and our actions don't matter anymore, because every single 1/10 of a degree of warming that we can prevent translates into saving and supporting millions of lives. And as the most recent UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report outlines in this very visual, that what lies on the right side of that vertical 2020 outlining our possible futures of warning, depending on our emission scenarios now, they are widely varied. In very low emission scenarios, we can stabilize a planet and atmosphere in which we can thrive. But if we don't create rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society, and our emissions continue to increase, then we end up in this unlivable purple zone. These options are really in our hands, and we in the health systems have the best argument for change possible that extend beyond partisan divides, because we can tap into the human self-interest in good health. Beyond the decades of focusing on polar bears, this human and planetary health argument is in our hands, and it is making massive strides. There has been incredible progress just recently, even at the last COP meeting, the UN climate negotiations in Dubai. We saw the first ever Climate and Health Day, where at previous COPs, it was only a few pavilions that were underscoring this intersection of climate and health, and now it has its own official day with a ministerial attached to it, hundreds of events across the entire COP system, many power holders and funders making pledges, and all of this is incredibly exciting to think about how quick that pace of galvanizing action has picked up and what we can achieve in the few short years ahead. And I just want to double down now into the neighborhood where I spend a lot of my time, just to describe some of the ways that the climate crisis impacts our mental health, because it isn't just that climate events threaten life and livelihood and therefore mental health, it's also that the state of our mental health directly impacts the climate itself. Because in order to take on all those far-reaching changes in the complex systems in which we're living, to shunt us into those lower emissions, safer scenarios that look more orange than purple in that diagram I showed you, we need to take on a lot of work, right? Reorganize policies and systems and supply chains and community resilience, and that means that we need enough baseline functioning to do all that, right? We can't be so depleted that it falls out of view. So in this way, if we're not careful, if these climate shocks and disruptions start to batter us at a population level so much that we can't take on that work, then we start to enact a vicious cycle, which we won't let happen. So the climate crisis impacts mental health through multiple pathways. We see that there are direct and indirect stressors like hurricanes and wildfires and floods, which can lead to anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, domestic abuse, suicidality. Extreme heat is linked with violence, aggression, self-harm, and we know that the psychological impacts of disaster outweigh the physical impacts about 40 to 1. Then there's physical health. All those marks of it that I already talked about have a well understood bi-directional relationship with mental health, because as we get ill, our mental health, our minds, our moods, understandably suffer too. And lastly, which is probably not a surprise to anyone in the room, we are living in the era of doom scrolling, right? Where it is easy to be connected through our devices at any moment of the day to a fire hose of scary headlines and bad news about the environmental track that we're on. And when this isn't balanced out with more supportive and nourishing narratives that breed a sense of active hope and offer publics viable pathways by which they can get involved in solutions, well, folks, we have a culture of rising climate anxiety. And while anyone who understands the extent to which their health is tied up with the health of our environment and knows what the climate science is saying today will understandably feel climate anxiety as an appropriate reaction, we see that this is most pronounced and damaging to our youth. So in order to understand the psychological impacts of climate on young people, my colleagues and I surveyed 10,000 16 to 25-year-olds around the world. We looked in places like India, Nigeria, the Philippines, Brazil, Finland, Australia, US. We were pretty alarmed to find that 45% of young people globally say that their thoughts and feelings about the climate crisis are interfering with daily life tasks like eating, sleeping, concentrating. 75% report that the future is frightening to them. 56% said they feel humanity is doomed, and 39% expressed hesitancy to have their own kids one day because of climate worries. Now, these thoughts and feelings were also significantly associated with a sense of being lied to by governments and betrayed by leaders, which introduces this whole idea of moral injury that I know you're very familiar with because of being in the healthcare workforce. Now, it's important to create resilience-building structures upstream that prevent this from precipitating into real mental health challenges beyond what is subclinical, non-pathological distress. Because we already see that the additional costs of mental disorders due to climate hazards and air pollution and inadequate access to green space are estimated to be a cost of $47 billion by the end of this decade. And these costs will balloon to $537 billion, it's predicted annually by 2050. And of course, because of these systemic injustices that are undergirding the climate crisis mentioned at the top of the talk, some of us are affected more than others, including children and young people, women, people on the front lines of disaster, including especially populations in the global south and communities of color in the global north, and especially also endangering anyone with mobility issues, which then targets the elderly and those living with disabilities, anyone with pre-existing mental illness. Certain conditions such as schizophrenia, for instance, make you 2 to 3 times more likely to die in a heat wave. Ranchers, farmers, outdoor workers, anyone living in close connection with landscapes that are changing, which then also means indigenous peoples worldwide. And lastly, a group that's often forgotten are the frontline climate professionals. Gary rightly said that the climate diplomats, the climate scientists, the environmental journalists, the green policymakers, and also the green healthcare workers who have their eye on this problem day in, day out. This is tough stuff. And we bear a psychological toll that comes with staring plainly at the breakdown of our life support systems in our day job. And we can be smarter about how we support each other through all this change. Now, I'm going to read you this quotation that first sent shivers down my spine when I encountered it. And it's by Gus Speth, who's a historian and scientist, and he says, "I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that." I think this really gets to the core of the issue, that we have to heal not only people, patients, communities, and the planet, but also a sick culture. And if I were to try and support climate scientists in bringing about this kind of spiritual, cultural transformation today, I would agree with this random person on the internet who once tweeted, "I wish Taylor Swift was in love with a climate scientist." Right? Because then the passion of the Swifties would mean that we wouldn't even have just mass mobilized movements, but even maybe a religion around climate science and solutions coming to save the day. But alas, she's in love with a football player, so we need to try some other things. So today, I would like to suggest, what if we took a different tack? What if we actually learned to welcome and honor the pain and the heartbreak that we naturally feel when we open our hearts to what is happening to our planet, to all of its living systems? We don't shame ourselves if we feel grief, because it's the other side of the coin of love for all that is in harm's way. Where could that get us if we actually allowed that to exist and didn't try to beat the feelings back or paper over them or shunt them into a corner of silence? Now, I want to share a story with you about a trailblazing climate and health leader named Dr. Gaurav Basu, who teaches and works at Harvard Medical School. Perhaps some of you even know him. Now, years ago, he was your typical global health doctor. He was doing amazing things in places like Liberia, and he believed that the climate crisis was serious and important, but he also felt that there are a lot of smart humans working on the problem, and we're going to figure it out. So he wasn't that rattled. Now, that all changed one day, a Sunday morning in 2018, when he groggily woke up, reached his arm out of bed, grabbed his phone, and pulled up the top story in the New York Times, which was about a recently dropped UN IPCC report, which outlined the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees of warming, which really meant the difference between some ecosystems existing and others not, some places being habitable and others not, and telling the world that we essentially have 12 years to coordinate our efforts and avert climate catastrophe. Now, he described to me that his climate awakening that day, it felt like a thunderbolt or a shockwave. And in his distressed state, he went quickly to go find his wife, who was pregnant and hanging out with their 2-year-old. And the jarring disconnect between what he'd just read and what he was seeing, it just ripped the veil right off him in a very visceral way. And it sent him into a state of having climate vision, where he could see the climate crisis in everything and everywhere he went for years. He recounts massive grief and intense feelings of despair and overwhelm. And he went on like this for months. He'd stay up late, he'd study, try to figure out ways in which he could be of use, asking, what is my voice? What is my place in this? How am I going to be effective? And the most positive experience happened when he and his wife started hosting monthly climate meetings in their basement. They just started sending out emails to everyone they knew, and they would invite some local speakers, like a local climate activist, a local technologist working on a climate solution, a city councilor, to collect in that basement room and talk about solutions. And he was astonished. The first time they held it, 50 people showed up, and it was packed ever since. And this focus on solution invited people at the end of each meeting to stand up and talk about what they were going to try to do to bring about change in their lives, in their families, in their group of friends, in their place of worship, in their profession. And Gaurav realized that something here was working, because there was a palpable emotion to it. People expressed it. They felt extremely held in this group. And it all felt authentic to who Gaurav is, because at the end of the day, he felt that we humans, we are designed to care for one another. And he started seeing that this act of relationship building led to people feeling empowered, which was the antidote to the despair that he had been feeling. And he also realized that there's a very effective and evidence-based way of doing this at scale, and that's community organizing. And when he combined community organizing with his specialty as a health professional, that's when he found his climate voice. He now co-directs the Climate Health Organizing Fellowship at Harvard and Cambridge Health Alliance, where they train health professionals on the skills of community organizing, because the existential nature of this problem calls on the response to be massive intersectional social movements. Now, using the methods of the godfather of community organizing, Marshall Gans, His program equips healthcare professionals in climate leadership, which they define as the practice of accepting responsibility to enable others to achieve shared purpose to address the health inequities that the climate crisis is deepening under conditions of uncertainty, which is such an amazing killer definition. Now, Gaurab's story of finding conviction and purpose and meaning from his grief really aligns with what the writer Elizabeth Rush tells us, which is that the only way to survive grief is to care for what remains with even more heart than before. And this is the opportunity that we all have working in this space when we move from only intellectualizing and thinking about this problem to encapsulate also feeling about this problem together. So I want to explore this dynamic just a little bit more with you using an activity created by Joanna Macy, and she's a renowned Buddhist scholar and systems thinker who over 40 years has honed a psychologically sophisticated set of activities that help change makers connect with all that is happening to the natural world right now in a way that makes them come alive around what concerns them most and reroute them, reconnect them to the greater web of life. And this open sentences comes from her body of work called The Work That Reconnects. And so I'm going to ask you to find a partner. And yes, the person right next to you is perfect, whether you know them yet or not. We're going to work in pairs for this, and the people online, you can identify with being either person A or person B and use the chat to respond. Now, essentially, person to make that easy for you. And what we're going to do is we're going to imagine that we are floating above the Hyatt. We are floating in our pairs above Salt Lake City, and then we're floating above Utah, the United States. We're floating now out in outer space. We're thinking back with our partner to our time on Earth. We're not dead, don't worry. We're just elsewhere for a little while, okay? And we're in a reflective state of mind. So I'm going to demonstrate the first one. If I were person A, my job is just to respond to this prompt, open-heartedly, no wrong answers, stream of consciousness. And person B, your job is just to deeply listen, not to rehearse your own answers, just to deeply witness them. Okay, and we're just going to do this for a minute. And the first question is, when you were back on Earth, what did you love most about being alive? And if it were me, I'd say, I loved that humans were so complex that we each had entire worlds living within us. And I loved feeling the 4 seasons change. And I loved how when my toddler laughed, he'd scrunch up his entire face, especially his nose, and just keep going until I stop you, okay? So please go for it, find your partner, identify the shortest hair, and respond. Hearing so many amazing conversations buzzing. Thanks for coming back together. Unsurprisingly, we're going to move now to person B, and it's your turn to answer. When you were back on Earth, what did you love most about being alive? Go for it. Thanks, everyone. Sorry to interrupt. All right. Now we're going to do this one more time, but with a different starting point. Okay, so it's back to person A, and your prompt to respond to is, when you were back on Earth, what broke your heart about the world? Go ahead. Thank you so much for bravely sharing that with the person next to you. And you know what's coming. Person B, same thing. Your turn. When you were back on Earth, what broke your heart about the world? Just wrapping up your thoughts as you're able to, and then coming back together. Thank you so much. Thank you, open-hearted humans. How was that for you? Emotional. Some claps? Nice. Can anyone just reflect on what that felt like to turn to maybe a stranger, maybe a friend, but go into those deep cutting questions? Did you notice anything about how you felt, about how the two answers maybe related to one another? What's that? Commonality. Yeah. Interrelationships between the two. Did anyone feel like they wish I'd started you off in the other direction so you could end with positive affect vibrating through your body right now? It's totally understandable. I apologize, but it's actually very intentional that Joanna Macy sets it up this way, because we need to start by coming from gratitude in order to, firstly, be able to bond with the other person and open our hearts. If we did it the other way, we might get very clammy very quickly. But also, within our gratitude, we contain the whole world of what we are concerned most about losing. And so, this all relates to the fact that we're doing very difficult work, and we need to be able to create practices and dive into them that allow us to maintain enough brightness of mind to do this work from places like gratitude. And I wrote this book, Generation Dread, Finding Purpose in an Age of Climate Anxiety, that really looks at how we can harness these tumultuous feelings that come with living at this time for life-protecting actions and ways to build community resilience, which your health systems are uniquely very well positioned to do in innovative ways at this time. So the good news is that there's so much that we can do to protect and promote mental health in our warming world, that we can really take that vicious cycle that I mentioned and flip it into a virtuous cycle of win-win solutions that tackle both the climate crisis and improving mental health at once by really amplifying co-benefiting policies and practices. Because we know that to prioritize active transport, walking and biking, for instance, instead of driving in cities, this is great and important for the climate, and the exercise boosts mental health, right? We also know, yeah, oh, great. Got a lover of exercise up front. Anyone else? Also, by the way, I haven't been at a conference where the gym was so packed in the morning. It's so nice to be amongst doctors who get that. Well done. So, yes, I mean, we are also, going back to these co-benefiting policies and practices, we know that improving the energy efficiency of our housing, this is critical for climate mitigation, and also it makes homes more affordable for people to heat, which reduces energy poverty, which then strengthens and supports mental health. And we know that increasing the provision of green and blue spaces by introducing waterways and trees and urban heat islands, this helps to absorb carbon dioxide, mitigate against warming, but also provide shade to residents on extremely hot days, at the same time that it increases access to nature. And when time is spent there, we get the forest bathing therapeutic effects of reducing depression symptoms, reducing psychological distress, and increasing happiness. So as a healthcare organization, with a really loud voice in your community and a lot of economic influence in the sense that you spend a lot of money, you hire a lot of people, when you're making these investments, what does it mean to keep win-win solutions that tackle the climate and community resilience in terms of mental and physical health improvements at the same time by co-designing these solutions with your community members, the people who you are there to serve, especially when they are from historically underserved communities where the health inequities of climate are felt most? Can you build physical spaces that foster social connections and social capital that copious evidence shows is what allows people to move through disaster when adversity hits without then ending up with psychopathology. And also, social capital allows people to rebuild faster. And can you address that by bringing people together to work on environmental problems in the places where they live and increase access to nature at the same time? Can you work with your city developers and your transportation planners to move bus stops and make it easier for underserved families living in disinvested areas to use public transit? Can you meet the needs of your community by growing healthy food on site and co-designing a teaching kitchen with community members that gets them learning together about food security for climate reality, as well as providing you with lots of healthy foods to be able to feed your patients organic, plant-based meals? Now, a neat example of this was created in response to the treatment gap where there weren't enough psychiatric beds in eastern Massachusetts, when Boston Medical Center redeveloped a defunct nursing home using the best modern practices in sustainable design and construction to create the nation's first zero-carbon behavioral health center. And it sits in the environmental justice community of Brockton to serve the people living there, and was literally built by working with a construction company that is minority owned, adding to economic justice in the local area. Now, another way to add to climate resilience is to transform your mental health systems themselves so that they can be more expansive community co-piloted ones that leverage the efforts of lay leaders and peer support workers. Because you know very well that irrespective of the climate crisis, we have a huge mental health crisis in this country, and there simply aren't enough specialists to go around. And so what do we do to address this large treatment gap, especially given that we have these problems today and we have a tidal wave of toxic stresses and trauma coming at us with climate change? We need to be social innovators. Fortunately, we can amplify and invest in frugal innovations that have come from the global south and low resource settings to get care out into areas where it otherwise wasn't available, such as through task shifting approaches. This is when lay leaders are trained by specialists to go out into their community and to deliver interventions that have been stripped of their jargon and simplified in order to help people who are like them, who live amongst them in the markets, in the schools, in the places of worship, in the libraries. And more than 100 clinical trials show that on the mental health side of things, these responses can be so effective that they're even more helpful at getting people to recovery from common mental health challenges than if they had gone to get primary care. And this is really imminently doable, and it's being done. So for instance, the widely celebrated Friendship Bench, which was created in Zimbabwe to help people with depression by training grandmothers, trusted, important figures in the community, to sit on benches that were placed in trusted community spaces and on the campuses of health centers to deliver this talk therapy to people. And when they received care, they're then moved on to a maintenance group of peer support. And again, this affordable, effective way of delivering evidence-based mental health support is now translating over to America. It's being implemented in places like New York City, in New Orleans, where the Billions Minds Institute, which is led by psychiatrist and climate activist Gary Belkin, is working to connect these climate mental health solutions for building community-minded resilience into Medicaid to be able to increase people's access to this kind of resource. Now, bigger healthcare organizations can also take inspiration from community health centers that serve low-income Americans who are often exceptional innovators in how to build community resilience to climate change because they're out there in the community designing this with the people it's meant to serve. An example that comes up quickly in this space is Crescent Care in New Orleans. Now, in 2021, Hurricane Ida left many people for weeks without fresh food, without power, and they had, ahead of the game, thought about, in the next storm, what do we do to make sure that our patients can stay in contact with us, especially when they need medical devices and power? And they had collected donated smartphones, which they distributed to more than 500 patients, along with monitoring devices. And they got a grant to set up this network of what they call community lighthouses, which are safe places where people can go and power and charge up their devices and phones, and they can cool off on extremely hot days, and they're now working to build more than 100 of these in churches and other places of worship, and they even deploy health teams that go out into the surrounding community and monitor for especially vulnerable people who are in their houses perhaps and need to be addressed because they require monitoring devices for their health. Now, it's a similar but different idea to the cascading network of now more than 160 community resilience hubs that are either in operation or development across the US that were first created in 2014 in Baltimore after community organizers there heard from a critical mass of people that in times of disaster, they don't care how bad it gets. They are not going to a government-related shelter or relief center or health center support. They instead want something trusted because those other resources are not what they trust. So together, co-designing these community resilience hubs ended up creating spaces that are much more than just relief centers. They're actually public living rooms that people want to hang out in, where they can get social services, legal aid, childcare, a food pantry, and are the places where social capital and social connectedness is bred. Without even needing to explicitly name it as such, you end up investing in one of the most powerful mental health interventions that we know of to prevent psychopathology in the times of disaster by getting people together to cooperate and work at a local level. And now there is a huge opportunity for us to bring health and healthcare into these kinds of sites by partnering with networks of community resilience creators, by getting on the ground with our community members we are serving to create trusted resources such as these. Now, on an individual level, people are moving through climate anxiety and grief in some adaptive ways that have been charted by a researcher, Pano Piccola, who did a survey of the available literature and produced this process model. Now, what it says is that we typically go from a state of not knowing about the climate crisis towards semi-awareness of it, and then often there's some kind of event that causes an awakening that produces a shock response, much like Gaurav Basu, who I mentioned, experienced that shock wave with the IPCC report. And there we might, throw ourselves into action, but risk burning out if we don't have other internal supports, or we could get lost in grief work, which clamps down on a feeling of hopelessness, or some of us are just so vigilant and rattled about this that we will subconsciously do everything we can to avoid the problem from coming into our consciousness, and then we avoid it all out, becoming that ostrich with the head in the sand. But of course, if we don't face it, we don't act. And what the research finds is that it's only when people skillfully learn how to integrate all three elements. So yes, action that brings solutions, but also narrows the gap between our environmental values and how we're showing up in the world, which brings psychic relief on an unconscious level, alongside appropriate engagement with difficult emotions, right? This is looking at resilience building practices, which I'll get to in a moment, instead of resorting to trying to paper over these feelings or dismiss them with a pill. And thirdly, flipping what used to be unconscious forms of distancing ourselves from the problem at all costs towards conscious forms of taking breaks from the urgency of the climate crisis so that we can recharge our personal batteries and be joyful creatures along the way, because as Gary said, it's not a race, it's not even a marathon, it's not a sprint, as it always says. Not a sprint, it's a marathon, and even more than that, it's a relay race. And we can afford to take breaks while other people go front of the line as we tend to our well-being and then recharge to go back out. So some of those resilience building practices, which I'm sure, in your healthcare workforce around the burnout that we've seen since the pandemic, have been popularized, socialized, things that we're turning to. Forest bathing, eating and sleeping well, mindfulness, gratitude practices, contemplative wisdom, journaling, somatic work, breathing exercises, connecting with our friends and family. For some, it's really taking on courage and resilience by connecting with their ancestors and stories of family continuance in hard times, working with spiritual leaders, and importantly, practicing those good boundaries between our climate work and personal life. And that last bit about self-care is not just, like millennial Instagram speak about bubble baths. It really is important because, as Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Now, I know that your healthcare workforce well-being is top of mind because of the incredible levels of burnout in doctors and nurses today. And a really cool thing about taking on a culture of bold climate action in your system is that working for an organization that cares about climate action, it's perceived to be a very positive thing by clinicians and staff. And working for an organization whose values align with yours has also been found to be a mental health protective factor for staff and clinicians. So in this way, staff well-being is a benefit of any kind of coordinated climate action that you can take and communicate around to create and foster that set of norms and culture within the organization. Another kind of win-win solution here. Now, because of the rising climate distress, a cottage industry of supports have gotten off the ground in recent years to meet people where they are, including a global decentralized network of conversations called climate cafes, where people can show up and know that they'll be validated and legitimized in their worries, where they can talk frankly about how they feel in the climate crisis and why that is. Peer support networks as well, including things like the Good Grief Network, who move people through climate distress in ways that allow them to metabolize it into meaning and purpose in community. They have a 10-step model that is framed off of Alcoholics Anonymous and is already being used in 16 countries. And there are climate-aware mental health practitioners in places like the Climate Psychology and Climate Psychiatry Alliances, where clinicians take a non-pathologizing approach to supporting their clients with climate distress. Now, there are many, many more, and they continue to show up in this new Wild West of figuring out how to build personal and collective community resilience to the mental health impacts of climate change. And we have put them up at a new resource hub at unthinkable.earth. So if you ever find yourself curious to go see what could connect to a need you have, someone in your organization, perhaps a young person in your life, feel free to check out that site. Okay. So that was a lot, and you might be wondering, well, what can I actually do, right, with all of this information? I just want to remind us off the bat, while there's many things we can do, just, consciously feeling your climate emotions and allowing them to move through you is actually a form of action. It's just typically not recognized as such because we do try to suppress and beat them out of the way as they are. Typically, we lack the social norms for processing them with each other. And this helps us to forge a culture of internal activism to support outward change when we can do that. And even after you've done that, you might say, okay, but I'm only one individual and this is also baked in. What can I possibly do to move the needle? And here, I love to resort to what the renowned environmentalist Bill McKibben always says whenever he has this question posed to him, which is, stop acting like an individual. Simple as that. It's a mind shift. Collectives are made up of many individuals. There's an inherent connection there. And we can really think about our spheres of influence personally, professionally, and politically where we can connect into collectives. Okay, so what can we do with this kind of mindset? Now, the urgent need to transition away from fossil fuels is a public health imperative. It just cannot be overstated. And the health sector needs to be at the center of advocacy for climate solutions. You have this really special, really trusted and privileged voice in our society as health professionals. You can do things like endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is a piece of social technology inspired by the way that we humans have come together in times of massive disarray to stop the proliferation of nuclear arms, ripping of holes in the ozone, landmines through treaties. And it is being signed onto by many nation states around the world, many health systems, and hopefully yourself if you haven't already, but perhaps you have, which would be, clapping for you. You can also just pay attention to what many of you are here to talk about, which is that the healthcare system needs to reduce its own emissions. You'll probably already be very familiar with these statistics that just bear repeating. In the US, the healthcare sector is responsible for 8.5% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions, and globally, healthcare sector is responsible for 4.6% of global greenhouse emissions. And since you're at this conference, you probably agree with me that it's just totally bananas to be polluting in ways that contribute to the diseases being put upon the shoulders of our patients who then come to the hospitals to heal from with our and your care. So thank goodness for Healthcare Without Harm, for Practice Green Health, for creating this beacon of resources to shepherd and guide people towards doing that work. And I also want to talk about divestment, which I know is very controversial. But this is something that healthcare institutions can do. They can divest from fossil fuels. The healthcare sector is heavily invested in fossil fuels in its retirement plans and its pensions, right? And the pension funds of 4 leading health systems, including the Mayo Clinic, Kaiser Permanente, HCA Healthcare, and Ascension Health System, have invested more than $4.6 billion in fossil fuels. And the US private hospital system collectively has an estimated $10 billion invested in this, planet-destroying industry. Now, what's controversial about them is that many economists say this doesn't even hurt the economics. This does not hurt the fossil fuel companies if you divest. Try a more effective tactic. My argument is not to try and destroy them financially by removing these investments. It's really a moral clarion call. And to say that true healing begins when the healthcare sector aligns its value-based practices, not its corporate-based practices, with the well-being of both patients and the planet. And it can be really helpful to think about who else has already achieved this, just a bunch of unimpressive people like Harvard, Princeton, Cornell, the cities of New York, San Francisco, DC, the Vatican, the World Council of Churches, the Ford and MacArthur Foundations have all successfully divested from fossil fuels. Now, investing in fossil fuels, it really undermines our collective values. And reversing this sends a strong message that we are breaking our addiction to fossil fuels in the service of healing our sick society and culture. And the healthcare industry, it divested from big tobacco in the 90s to send a strong moral message. So we know that it can do this. 5, you can put your hospital at the center of community resilience. You can think about win-win solutions and co-designing them with community members who know how to address and solve for the health inequities that they're experiencing because of that lived expertise. This could not be more critical to underscore today. We have to get outside of our silos and outside the 4 walls of our hospitals themselves into the community. And 6, you can actually sign up for this Climate Health Organizing Fellowship program that is run by Gaurav Basu that I mentioned at Harvard, at the Cambridge Health Alliance. They are reopening their applications in July for the next cohort to develop the climate leadership of health professionals. And I highly recommend the program. I went through it myself, and it was awesome. I put it out there as a possibility. It could be life-changing for those of you who do it. It will transform the way that you think about greening your health systems and building community resilience. And no, Gaurav did not pay me to say any of that. He doesn't even know that I'm talking about it. Lastly, coming up here, you can also celebrate with your patients opportunities for advocacy based on their unique climate health vulnerabilities. One of the most hopeful stories that I heard recently was about the grandest court for human rights, the European Court of Human Rights in that continent, where they ruled in favor of 2,000 elderly women who had come together to say to their government of Switzerland that their climate policies are completely ineffective to protect them from heat stress and death, given the disproportionate vulnerability they face because of their gender and their age. And the European Court of Human Rights found that indeed Switzerland is violating this population's human rights and respect for what's called private and family life. And it's an unappealable ruling. And now Switzerland has to go back and revisit its climate policies and create a new architecture, even for near-term emissions reduction, so that they align with the Paris Agreement. And this kind of hopeful story begets so much more hope about ways that we can push for this kind of change based on having our eyes laser focused on what these health inequities really are. Now, this brings us full circle to the Plum Village meditation retreat where I met Gary Cohen, resulting in me being here today at all. And that's to say that, in order to take on all of this work, all this change, we really need the right mindset that can motivate us, that can give us that willpower to keep going, despite the entrenched oppositions and setbacks. And I love this mindset of stubborn optimism, which is put forward by those lead architects of the Paris Agreement, Christiana Figueres and Tom Rivett-Carnac. Their optimism is not a naive optimism. It is not passive wishful thinking. It is not techno-utopianism. It is a hard-earned optimism that is mature and deeply convicted that you only earn by getting to the far side of despair. And it respects emotions like fear and grief as being part of this picture, but it will never, ever let them have the last word, because this mindset knows from the history of social movements that it's only when people roll up their sleeves and band together and say, no matter how hard against the wall you push us, we will never give up, no matter how dark it gets, even when it feels like all is lost, that's what opens up the future potentialities, causes the needle to move, and brings on change. And they also are very open about the fact that they need internal resourcing and strengthening to be able to be this courageous all the time, given what we need to achieve in this winnowing time span. And yes, Plum Village and mindfulness and these kinds of resources, you'll have your own that look perhaps different for you, but the point is that we need to be able to practice the skills that allow us to be with the suffering that is in the world and in this work, and yet also generate enough joy and happiness that we can maintain enough brightness of mind, that we can continue to serve Mother Earth and serve other people and serve our patients and live meaningful lives. It aligns with the best definition of hope I've ever come across from the Czech poet and statesman Václav Havel, who said, "Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out." That is stubborn optimism. Now, I want to offer you an eco-resilience framework to think about, put forward by these scholars, Buzzell and Chalquist, so that we can permeate our daily activities and roles and institutions with them. And it has 5 tenets. That to be resilient in these times, we need to care for the earth, including local places. How can we do that even on our campuses? We need to care for each other, including sharing what we have. We have to care for ourselves, including looking after our own health and emotional support, personal resilience. We need to care for our vision, these deeply determined states of our consciousness, including our big dreams, our important intuitions, our ability to imagine and to feel inspiration, connect with awe and wonder for being alive at all, working with gratitude for what we're protecting. And we need to care for story, as we mind the stories that we are telling ourselves about our place in the world right now with each other and whatever possibilities await, so that we don't fall victim to falling for these narratively foreclosing stories about the future that can trap us in immobilizing places. Now, I'd like to conclude by just sharing my favorite quotation these days, which comes from researchers writing in The Lancet who do a better job at eloquently explaining everything I've tried to put forth to you in an hour when they write, recognizing that emotions are often what leads people to act. It is possible that feelings of ecological anxiety and grief, although uncomfortable, are in fact the crucible through which humanity must pass to harness the energy and conviction needed for the life-saving changes now required. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Britt. And thanks for bringing our own personal resilience into the room and the resilience of our communities. And my hope is that in future Clean Meds, that we have many more stories to tell about how we're partnering with our communities, with our institutions to build that muscle, that sensibility within ourselves and with our institutions to continue to do this work going forward. So that's something to look forward to future generations and future Clean Meds. Now I'd like to introduce Jeremy Heaton, who's our new climate health organizer and also has his own song out on YouTube. One day he's going to sing for us. Jeremy?
Tall people problems. How's everybody doing? I am so pleased to be with you all here today to present this award, Healthcare Without Harm, and the Alliance of Nurses for Healthier Environments. Annually, we present the Charlotte Brody Award to a nurse leader who promotes and protects environmental health. Our 2024 honoree, Michael Collins, is a retired nurse fighting for more climate-conscious policymaking and educating his nurse fellows on the impact of climate and health. He is also the president of an organization called Indigenous AF, which supports community work and projects which strengthen Indigenous cultures, knowledge, and identity through the arts and education. Please welcome to the stage our Charlotte Brody awardee, Michael Collins.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am deeply honored and humbled to receive the Charlotte Brody Award. I want to thank Healthcare Without Harm, the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, and everyone involved in making this decision. This recognition means a great deal to me, and I am truly grateful. I have been a registered nurse professional for over 40 years. As a baccalaureate-prepared nurse, I am a consumer of research. It has been the outcome of researchers, like many of you in this room today, that has provided the framework for an evidence-based practice. I've seen firsthand climate change's increasing effect on our patients and our communities. Charlotte Brody's pioneering work in climate health and healthcare without harm has been a tremendous source of inspiration to me. As a registered nurse, a dedicated climate researcher, and environmental health advocate, Charlotte Brody has shown how critical the role of the nurse is in this field. Nurses have always been on the front line of healthcare, and our role in climate research and health is no different. I have seen firsthand how climate change has increasingly affected patients as the summers grow hotter and hotter and respiratory illnesses become more difficult to treat. Our unique position allows us to advocate for our patients and to provide practical solutions. As a member of the Service Employees International Union's Nurse Alliance in August of 2015, I attended a legislative lobby training with the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. And from that training, I began to lobby at the United States Congress for healthcare legislation, and also with the Climate Action Campaign to encourage our legislators to support EPA guidances. One of my proudest moments was in December of 2019 when I went to jail with Jane Fonda. We were protesting our Congress's legislative inaction on climate change. Looking forward, I'm excited to continue my work with climate health. My goal is to increase my knowledge and the impact of climate change on patients and how to deliver health care without harm. As a nurse member of the Southern Nevada Advisory Board of Health, I was able to share with my colleagues the harm that was being done through emissions from our anesthesia gases from our hospitals in Las Vegas. Once again, I want to thank you for this incredible honor. I am deeply grateful for your support and recognition. Let us continue to work together to advance climate health and make a positive impact in this world. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Please allow me to welcome to the stage Kate Gottlieb, Sustainability Strategy Manager for Practice Green Health.
Wow, what a big room full of people. Congratulations, Michael. It's my honor to announce another award. The Stephanie Davis Waste Reduction and Pollution Prevention Award is an enduring tribute to Stephanie Davis, who worked with Healthcare Without Harm at its inception in 1996 and was a tireless champion of the movement towards sustainable healthcare by reducing waste and eliminating the use of harmful chemicals and materials in healthcare products and processes. The deserving recipients for the 2024 represent a cross-section of champions working every day, as Stephanie did, to make healthcare more sustainable. Each received a scholarship to join us here today at CleanMed. Congratulations to the 2024 Stephanie Davis Waste Reduction and Pollution Prevention recipients. Please hold your applause until the winners are read. Brianna Chang, Ivy Lynn, Cameron Locke, Ashley Poletti, Louisa Shelby. Now, let's enjoy a break with our exhibitors in the Salt Lake foyer until 4 p.m. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Britt Wray's book, please join her in the foyer until 5 p.m. We'll have all Stephanie Davis Award winners come to the front for a professional photo. And then after the afternoon sessions, we look forward to mingling with all of you at our opening reception from 5 to 6:30 in the Salt Lake foyer. Please be sure to use your app for the agenda, networking, and discover other activities such as our poster sessions, headshot opportunities, and participate in conference well-being initiatives, including free yoga, a fun run, and our relaxation room out here, which is really nice. So please enjoy your time here at CleanMed, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the next sessions. Thank you.